Understanding Judaism and Zionism, thanks to Israel Shahak's book, Jewish History, Jewish Religion, The Weight of 3,000 Years Following Poland. The old pre-1795 Poland, a feudal republic with an elective king, is a converse example. It illustrates how, before the advent of the modern state, the position of the Jews was socially most important and their internal autonomy greatest under a regime which was completely retarded to the point of utter degeneracy. Due to many causes, medieval Poland lagged in its development behind countries like England and France. The strong feudal-type monarchy, yet without any parliamentary institutions, was formed there only in the 14th century, especially under Casimir the Great, 1333-1370. Immediately after his death, changes of dynasty and other factors led to a very rapid development of the power of the noble magnates, then also of the petty nobility, so that by 1572 the process of reduction of the king to a figurehead and exclusion of all other non-noble estates from political power was virtually complete. In the following 200 years, the lack of government turned into an acknowledged anarchy, to the point where a court decision in a case affecting a nobleman was only a legal license to wage a private war to enforce the verdict, for there was no other way to enforce it, and where feuds between great noble houses in the 18th century involved private armies numbering tens of thousands, much larger than the derisory forces of the official army of the Republic. This process was accompanied by a debasement in the position of the Polish peasants, who had been free in the early Middle Ages to the point of utter serfdom, hardly distinguishable from outright slavery, and certainly the worst in Europe. The desire of noble men in neighboring countries to enjoy the power of the Polish Pan over his peasants, including the power of life and death, without any right of appeal, was instrumental in the territorial expansion of Poland. The situation in the eastern lands of Poland, Byelorussia, and the Ukraine, colonized and settled by newly unserved peasants, was worst of all. Note: until the 18th century, the position of serfs in Poland was generally supposed to be even worse than in Russia. In that century, certain features of Russian serfdom, such as public sales of serfs, got worse than in Poland, but the central Tsarist government always retained certain powers over the enslaved peasants, for example, the right to recruit them to the national army. End of note. A small number of Jews, albeit in important positions, had apparently been living in Poland since the creation of the Polish state. A significant Jewish immigration into that country began in the 13th century and increased under Casimir the Great, with a decline in the Jewish position in Western and then in Central Europe. Not very much is known about Polish Jewry in that period, but with the decline of the monarchy in the 16th century, particularly under Sigismund I the Old, 1506-1548, and his son Sigismund II Augustus, 1548-1572, Polish Jewry burst into social and political prominence, accompanied as usual with a much greater degree of autonomy. It was at this time that Poland's Jews were granted their greatest privileges, culminating in the establishment of the famous Committee of Four Lands, a very effective autonomous Jewish organ of rule and jurisdiction over all the Jews in Poland's four divisions. One of its many important functions was to collect all the taxes from Jews all over the country, deducting part of the yield for its own use and for the use of local Jewish communities, and passing the rest on to the state treasury. What was the social role of Polish Jewry from the beginning of the 16th century until 1795? With the decline of royal power, the king's usual role in relation to the Jews was rapidly taken over by the nobility, with lasting and tragic results both for the Jews themselves and for the common people of the Polish Republic. All over Poland, the nobles used Jews as their agents to undermine the commercial power of the royal towns, which were weak in any case. Alone among the countries of Western Christendom, in Poland, a nobleman's property inside a royal town was exempt from the town's laws and guild regulations. In most cases, the nobles settled their Jewish clients in such properties, thus giving rise to a lasting conflict. The Jews were usually victorious in the sense that the towns could neither subjugate nor drive them off. But in the frequent popular riots, Jewish lives and even more Jewish property were lost. The nobles still got the profits. Similar or worse consequences followed from the frequent use of Jews as commercial agents of noblemen. They won exemption from most Polish tolls and tariffs, to the loss of the native bourgeoisie. But the most lasting and tragic results occurred in the eastern provinces of Poland, roughly the area east of the present border, including almost the whole of the present Ukraine, and reaching up to the great Russian language frontier. Until 1667, the Polish border was far east of the Dnieper, so that Poltava, for example, was inside Poland. In those wide territories, there were hardly any royal towns. The towns were established by nobles and belonged to them, and they were settled amongst almost exclusively by Jews. Until 1939, the population of many Polish towns east of the river Bug was at least 90% Jewish. And this demographic phenomenon was even more pronounced in that area of Tsarist Russia annexed from Poland and known as the Jewish Pale. Outside the towns, very many Jews throughout Poland, but especially in the east, were employed as the direct supervisors and oppressors of the unserved peasantry, as bailiffs of whole manors, invested with the landlord's full coercive powers, or as lessees of particular feudal monopolies, such as the corn mill, the liquor still and public house, with the right of armored search of peasant houses for illicit steals, or the bakery, and as collectors of customary feudal dues of all kinds. In short, in eastern Poland, until the rule of the nobles and of the feudalized church formed exclusively from the nobility, the Jews were both the immediate exploiters of the peasantry and virtually the only town dwellers. No doubt, most of the profit they extracted from the peasants was passed on to the landlords in one way or another. No doubt, the oppression and subjugation of the Jews by the nobles were severe, and the historical record tells many a harrowing tale of the hardship and humiliation inflicted by noblemen on their Jews. But, as we have remarked, the peasants suffered worse oppression at the hands of both landlords and Jews, and one may assume that, except in times of peasant uprisings, the full weight of the Jewish religious laws against Gentiles fell upon the peasants. As will be seen in the next chapter, these laws are suspended or mitigated in cases where it is feared that they might arouse dangerous hostility towards Jews. But the hostility of the peasants could be disregarded as ineffectual so long as the Jewish bailiff could shelter under the peace of a great lord. The situation stagnated until the advent of the modern state, by which time Poland had been dismembered. Therefore, Poland was the only big country in Western Christendom from which the Jews were never expelled. A new middle class could not arise out of the utterly enslaved peasantry, and the old bourgeoisie was geographically limited and commercially weak and therefore powerless. Overall, matters got steadily worse, but without any substantial change. Internal conditions within the Jewish community moved in a similar course. In the period 1500s-1795, one of the most superstition-ridden in the history of Judaism, Polish Jewry was the most superstitious and fanatic of all Jewish communities. The considerable power of the Jewish autonomy was used increasingly to stifle all original or innovative thought, to promote the most shameless exploitation of the Jewish poor by the Jewish rich in alliance with the rabbis, and to justify the Jews' role in the oppression of the peasants in the service of the nobles. Here, too, there was no way out except by liberation from the outside. Pre-1795 Poland, where the social role of the Jews was more important than in any other classical diaspora, illustrates better than any other country the bankruptcy of classical Judaism.